Alright, all you ghosts and ghouls of the video gaming world, welcome to another Scarlet Moon Broken Toy Soldier edition of the DJ Smokey's Tales from the Disc. And this week's tale of horror comes from the video game none other than Unturned. So with the approval of a violent society, I think it's time for us to find out who we truly are while avoiding the stars as we paint the ghoulish picture. It all happened one day or night, I don't remember. I woke up in the bottom of a ship with a headache and a pair of clothes folded out for me, and with a note inside of it that said 4 things: arm yourself, find food and water, find shelter, and beware of the moon. I didn't know what any of this meant. My head was still ringing from whatever the hell happened. All I remembered was trying to help my friends, being shoved onto a ship, screaming, and then finally, silence. As I made my way outside the ship, to my horror, I would see the entire town torn to pieces. I would see with my pair of binoculars that the old rail line and the bridge to leave town were both destroyed. There was no way out. I was stuck here. The ship didn't even have enough fuel for us to leave. But I decided, instead of leaving, to see what I could salvage from this town and hopefully find out what happened and why in the world I was shoved into this ship. Days went on and I was just still lost in a fog in my own head, still hearing the sounds of screams and then silence. And as I made my way through each town, I would listen to the piece of paper to find some form of weapon to arm myself, food and water so I could survive, a tiny house that I was able to find in a neighborhood that looked familiar to me, but the last part of that letter was always the missing piece to the puzzle. Why should I be afraid of the moon? As I made my way through the town one day to search for standard supplies to keep myself alive, all of a sudden some crazy lady from out of nowhere just jumped out of the woods and tried to attack me. I had no choice but to shoot her. She just kept running at me and screaming with blood coming from out of her mouth and tried to bite me, but I shot her before that could happen. I would find an old TV in one of the other buildings across from the one I was staying in, and it would say that the whole town was overrun by a mutant disease to send people into a blood-hungry frenzy to anything that has living flesh. The only way to take these things out was to shoot it in the head or to decapitate it completely. I knew then something was terribly wrong. One day I was lucky enough to find a mode of transportation to try to find my way out of here, or at least to an airport to fly my way out. But by the time I got to the airport, I realized that all the planes were destroyed, but at least in the radio tower I would have some sign of hope to call for help to somebody to get me out of here. I would run as fast as I could until my lungs felt like they were gonna collapse and head directly into the guard tower, avoiding 2 of these mysterious mutinized guards that were guarding it just in case of my arrival, or where they were just waiting for somebody to show up to eat. As I turned on the radio receiver, I looked for an open signal and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Is there anybody out there? Can anybody help me? I'm stuck in a town. I can't leave. There's people trying to kill me. Help!" But on the other side of that radio would be nothing but static. Every single frequency I tried, every single day, lead to nothing but static. I would curl up into a ball right there in the radio tower, waiting for the signal to come back, and didn't realize by the time I actually heard something on the other side of a distress signal, it would be from a Coast Guard that happened to ship across the same army base I was in with the ship. And they said that they had help. They had help. They can finally get me out of here. But by the time I realized this signal hit the airwaves and responded back that I was gonna make my way there, I would see it high in the sky. The moon. The very moon that note told me that I should beware of. But I didn't listen. This was my only shot to get out of here. If I didn't leave that guard tower at that time, I would have no way out and no chance to live a happy life outside of this living nightmare I've been living for the past couple of days. But little did I know, while I was going on this makeshift trip back to the place where I once started, I slowly started to remember the reason why I should be afraid of the moon. It was the reason they shoved me into that ship in the first place. It was faint, but I remember when I got shoved into that ship, I saw glowing red eyes, and me getting pushed into the dock, hitting my head on the bottom of the steel plate, and then hearing screaming from a girl telling me, "Save yourself! You're our only hope!" And it was at that one particular moment I remembered everything. She was the one who wrote the note. She was the one who told me about all the things to beware of. And she was the scientist that wrote the cure on the back of that note. But while I was driving with this new revelation fresh in my head, when I tried to go back to the base to collect my items, I would see 60 red glowing eyes outside of my base. I left the fire cooking and they knew that somebody was gonna come back, and when they did, they will have their next meal. Before I could do anything and pull the car into reverse, I found myself surrounded by a whole bunch of red glowing eyes, hungry mouths covered in blood, and ready to rip me limb from limb. At that current moment, I would go with my instincts and decide to put the car in drive and drive right through those zombies straight to my way to freedom. But the zombies, when I ran them over, covered the windshield. I couldn't see. I was driving blind, and by the time I could get them off the windshield, I would run straight into a fire truck, and the car would crash instantly. But that was only the beginning of my problems. Because after that car crash, and I tried to get out of the car, the doors were jammed, the windows were stuck, and the windshield was covered with those ravenous beasts. And the next thing I know, I would smell gasoline. But that faint smell of gasoline would soon turn into a raging fire. And as I saw in the distance in the sky, I would see the Coast Guard that I called, radioed for help, and my only savior that would seem a million miles away fly just right over my head as I would try to scream for help, only to see the helicopter fly away in the distance. And after watching the Coast Guard fly off to a world I would never see again, I would turn and look at the moon and smile as the car would get engulfed in flames, along with the last hope for humankind. And with that, folks, wraps it up for another edition of the DJ Smokey's Tales from the Disc. And with that, we'll be back with more right after this. So stay tuned.